Across the world, stone structures remain that don't behave the way history says they should. Platforms laid before cities existed. Towers raised before agriculture was secure. Underground systems planned for generations that never wrote a word. These weren't experiments. They were deliberate constructions made by people who understood land, weight, water, and time far better than we're usually told. Tonight, we're moving slowly through these places. Not to prove anything, but to notice what the stones themselves reveal when you stop rushing past them. Just listen. Because when these sites are seen together, they leave behind one quiet, uncomfortable question. How much of the human story was already complete? Before history says it began. Chiricahua stone alignments. In the high desert of southeastern Arizona, where volcanic peaks rise above grassland and silence stretches for miles, there is a landscape that resists easy explanation. Stone towers stand in long rows. Narrow passages run straight for surprising distances. Balanced rocks perch in ways that feel deliberate, almost calculated. This is Chiricahua. At first, the land appears natural. Dramatic, yes, but familiar. Erosion, wind, and time are the standard explanations offered for what we see here. And yet, as you move deeper into the formations, something subtle begins to shift. Patterns begin to appear. Not chaos, not randomness, alignment. The Chiricahua Mountains are the remains of a massive volcanic eruption that occurred millions of years ago. Layers of ash hardened into rhyolite tuff, later fractured and sculpted by erosion. This much is undisputed, but erosion alone does not explain everything. Across the landscape, stone pillars rise in parallel groupings. Narrow corridors run between walls of rock that maintain consistent spacing for dozens of meters. Certain stones appear deliberately balanced, their centers of gravity improbably precise. From above, some formations align along straight axes that stretch far beyond what coincidence would comfortably allow. This is where Chiricahua becomes controversial. Geologists see natural jointing patterns. Others see selection. Not construction in the traditional sense, but intentional use of natural geometry. The Apache people, who lived in and around these mountains for generations, did not see Chiricahua as random stone. They named it the land of the standing up rocks. Oral traditions describe the formations as frozen beings, placed deliberately as warnings, markers, or guardians. Myth does not prove engineering, but it preserves memory. Walking the trails today, you notice something important. The alignments are not uniform everywhere. They appear in specific zones, areas where visibility opens, where sound carries differently, where movement naturally slows. These are not places optimized for shelter. They are places optimized for awareness. Some corridors frame distant peaks with striking accuracy. Others funnel the eye toward sunrise or sunset points at certain times of year. Standing stones cast long, narrow shadows that interact with neighboring formations in ways that feel rehearsed rather than accidental. This raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if Chiricahua was not built, but recognized? What if ancient people identified naturally aligned stone and amplified its meaning, clearing paths, marking routes, and returning to the same formations repeatedly until the landscape itself became structured? This kind of interaction would leave little archaeological debris. No mortar, no cut blocks, no obvious tools. Only repeated human presence and selective emphasis. And that is exactly what we find. Evidence of long-term indigenous use appears throughout the region. Trails, campsites, and activity zones positioned consistently near certain rock groupings. Not everywhere. Only near specific formations. The stone dictated behavior. In ancient cultures around the world, natural stone formations were often treated as sacred precisely because they already appeared ordered. Humans did not always impose geometry. Sometimes they recognized it. Chiricahua may represent this older relationship with stone. Not domination, not construction, but alignment with what already existed. The balanced rocks deserve special attention. Some rest on contact points so small that modern visitors struggle to understand how they have remained stable through earthquakes, storms, and centuries of weathering. Their stability depends on exact placement, center of mass perfectly aligned. Nature can do this, but not often, and when it does, people notice. In several locations, these balanced stones appear positioned, where sightlines converge, at trail junctions, overlooks, or natural thresholds between open land and enclosed corridors. They mark transition. That function matters. In a prehistoric context, such markers would guide movement, ceremony, or storytelling. Stone becomes reference. Memory becomes spatial. The Chiricahua alignments also affect sound. In narrow passages, footsteps echo sharply. Voices carry in unexpected ways. Wind funnels through stone corridors, creating low, resonant tones. This sensory manipulation is not subtle. Anyone standing here feels it. Whether these effects were intentionally used or simply recognized and incorporated, they would have shaped human behavior. Slowing movement, encouraging pause, reinforcing the feeling that this place was different. And difference is the foundation of sacred space. In a series exploring prehistoric structures and sites that appear beyond modern expectations, Chiricahua challenges a deeply ingrained assumption that intelligence in the past must always express itself through construction. Sometimes intelligence expresses itself through selection, through choosing where to gather, where to align stories with landscape, where stone already speaks loudly enough. Modern archaeology struggles with places like this because they do not fit neatly into categories. Chiricahua is not a ruin. It is not a city. It is not a monument in the classical sense. It is a designed experience without visible design. Standing among the stone alignments today, there is no single moment of revelation. Instead, understanding accumulates slowly. You notice repetition. You notice restraint. You notice how often paths return you to the same viewpoints. This is not accidental. Someone understood how people move through space, how attention works, how stone can shape thought without being shaped itself. Chiricahua reminds us that ancient knowledge did not always seek permanence through alteration. Sometimes it sought permanence through recognition, by identifying what already carried order and meaning, and letting it endure. The stones here were never meant to explain themselves. They were meant to be encountered. And that may be why they still unsettle us, because they suggest that long before humans learned to carve stone into cities, they learned something far more subtle: how to listen to it. Bubanj Hill. On the southern edge of the modern city of Nish, where roads, buildings, and traffic now dominate the landscape, there is a low hill that quietly preserves one of the longest human stories in southeastern Europe. This is Bubanj Hill. At first glance it appears ordinary, a gentle rise, exposed soil, fragmented stone, nothing that immediately suggests monumentality. But beneath the surface, and embedded into the slope itself, lies a sequence of stone terraces that record thousands of years of continuous human presence. Bubanj is not a single period site. It is a layered place. Archaeological evidence shows that people occupied this hill repeatedly from the Neolithic period onward, returning generation after generation. Each group encountered the same challenge: a sloping hillside prone to erosion, runoff, and instability. Their solution was simple and profound. They reshaped the hill. The stone terraces of Bubanj were constructed by cutting into the slope and reinforcing it with stone retaining walls. These walls held back soil, created level surfaces, and transformed uneven ground into usable space. This is landscape engineering. The terraces are not random. They follow the contour of the hill with remarkable consistency. Each level is carefully aligned, creating a stepped sequence that stabilizes the slope while maximizing habitable area. This approach reveals a deep understanding of gravity, soil behavior, and water movement. Knowledge gained not through theory, but through long-term observation. Rainwater was guided rather than resisted. Soil was retained rather than allowed to slide. Space was created without flattening the land entirely. The result was a settlement that could endure. What makes Bubanj especially significant is the duration of its use. Archaeological layers show that these terraces were not abandoned after one phase. They were reused, repaired, and rebuilt over thousands of years, from the Neolithic, through the Bronze Age and into later periods. Each generation inherited a shaped landscape, and instead of erasing it, they worked within it. This continuity suggests that the terraces were not merely practical. They were accepted as the correct way to live on this hill. Knowledge of how to maintain them was passed on, likely through demonstration rather than instruction. Stone became memory. The retaining walls themselves are modest in height, but robust in construction. Stones were selected for size and fit, stacked carefully without mortar. Larger stones anchor the base. Smaller stones lock gaps and distribute pressure. This method allows flexibility. Rather than cracking under stress, the walls absorb movement, a critical feature in a region prone to seasonal freeze-thaw cycles and heavy rainfall. The terraces also structured social space. Living areas, working zones, and pathways emerged naturally along the stepped levels. Movement up and down the hill followed, predictable routes, reinforcing patterns of daily life. Architecture here did not impose order, it revealed it. What is especially striking is how early this kind of terracing appears. In the Neolithic layers at Bubanj, we already see evidence of deliberate slope management at a time when societies are often described as small, mobile, and only lightly invested in place. Bubanj contradicts that idea. These people were not passing through, they were staying. And they were planning to stay. Terracing represents a commitment to place. It is labor-intensive, slow to construct, and meaningless if abandoned quickly. Building terraces means believing that future seasons and future people will benefit from the effort. That belief matters. It tells us that early communities here were already thinking beyond immediate survival. They were shaping environments not just for themselves, but for those who would come after. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the stone terraces of Bubanj Hill are essential because they show how complexity can emerge quietly. No temples, no walls announcing power, no monuments demanding attention. Just stone placed where it mattered most. The terraces do not overwhelm the landscape, they integrate with it. From a distance, the hill still looks natural. Only when you look closely do you see how carefully it was shaped. This subtlety is easy to overlook, but it is also why Bubanj endured. Standing on the terraces today, surrounded by modern city noise, it is easy to forget how ancient this solution is. Yet the logic remains unchanged. The terraces still hold soil. They still manage water. They still create stability. They still work. Bubanj Hill reminds us that some of humanity's most important architectural achievements were not about reaching upward, but about learning how to stay in place, how to adapt land without destroying it, how to build for generations rather than moments, how to let stone quietly support life. These terraces are not impressive because they are large. They are impressive because they lasted. And in that endurance, they tell a story that modern history often skips. That long before cities and states, people already knew how to shape land with patience, restraint, and foresight, stone by stone, layer by layer, season after season. Aramumuru. High on the windswept plateau near Lake Titicaca, where the air is thin and the land feels suspended between earth and sky, there is a wall of solid stone that has been cut in a way that immediately unsettles the eye. It is not a cave. It is not a doorway that leads anywhere. And yet, it feels like an entrance. This is Aramumuru, often called the Gate of the Gods. At first glance, the site appears deceptively simple. A massive rock face, a recessed, door-shaped carving. Clean lines cut straight into the stone. No decoration, no inscriptions. No visible tools left behind. Just geometry. The opening stands roughly 7 meters tall, carved directly into living rock. At its center is a smaller niche, perfectly placed, as if designed to hold something, or someone, standing at a precise point. This is not random erosion. It is deliberate subtraction. The stone surrounding the doorway is untouched, while the interior plane is flattened with surprising precision. The edges are straight. The proportions feel intentional. There is no sign that the opening was ever meant to be fully cut through. This was not a passage, it was a symbol. The region around Lake Titicaca is one of the most archaeologically complex landscapes in the Americas. Long before the Inca, cultures here built monumental platforms, carved stone with extreme precision, and aligned structures with celestial cycles. Aramumuru belongs to this deeper layer of Andean history, one that predates imperial narratives and written records. Local traditions speak of the site as a threshold, a place where priests, heroes, or beings passed between worlds. Legends describe a golden disc placed into the central niche, activating the doorway and allowing passage beyond ordinary reality. These stories are not evidence, but they persist. And persistence matters. From an architectural perspective, Aramumuru raises immediate questions. Why carve a false door? Why expend effort? Shaping stone into an entrance that leads nowhere? Why place it here, far from major settlements, exposed to wind and weather? The answer may lie in how ancient cultures understood symbolic space. In many early belief systems, thresholds did not need to be physically functional. A doorway could mark transition without allowing passage. Standing before it, not crossing it, was the act. The doorway becomes a focus point. At Aramumuru, the central niche aligns with human height. When someone stands there, their body fits the proportions of the carving almost exactly. The stone frames the individual, isolating them from the surrounding landscape. This is not accidental. The effect is psychological. The person becomes the center of the space. Sound changes. Wind drops. The world feels momentarily paused. This suggests ritual use. The site's location reinforces this idea. It sits along ancient routes connecting ceremonial centers around Lake Titicaca. The plateau offers wide visibility, but the doorway itself faces a rock wall, not a vista. Attention is directed inward. Geologically, the stone is hard and uniform, not easy to carve with simple tools. Creating such a flat, recessed surface would require sustained effort, consistent technique, and careful control. No rough pecking marks remain. No unfinished edges. The work was completed cleanly. What makes Aramumuru especially difficult to interpret is the absence of associated structures. No platforms, no enclosures, no dwellings. This was not a settlement or a temple complex. It was a single act of stone shaping. That isolation suggests the site's meaning was concentrated, not distributed. Whatever happened here did not require crowds. It required presence. One person, one moment, one place. Some researchers have suggested that Aramumuru functioned as a ritual initiation site, a place where individuals underwent symbolic transition. Others see it as a boundary marker, defining sacred territory without enclosing it. Still others argue that the doorway was never finished, an abandoned project halted before completion. But this explanation struggles with the precision of what exists. Unfinished work usually leaves traces of interruption. Here, the carving feels resolved. The edges are intentional. The proportions are balanced. Nothing feels incomplete. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Aramumuru occupies a unique position. It does not demonstrate engineering through mass or complexity. It demonstrates engineering through restraint. The builders removed only what was necessary to create meaning. No more, no less. Stone here is not structural. It is communicative. Standing before the gate of the gods today, the experience is difficult to describe. There is no spectacle, no obvious function. And yet, the mind insists on interpreting it as an entrance. That instinct is powerful. It suggests that the builders understood something fundamental about human perception, that certain shapes carry meaning regardless of culture or language. A doorway implies transition, even when it leads nowhere. Aramumuru reminds us that ancient architecture did not always aim to shelter bodies or organize cities. Sometimes it aimed to organize thought, to mark a place where ordinary rules pause, where the boundary between worlds feels thin, where stone becomes suggestion rather than instruction. Whether the Gate of the Gods was a ritual focus, a symbolic threshold, or something we no longer have language to describe, its presence continues to provoke the same response it likely did thousands of years ago. You stop. You face it. And for a moment, you expect something to happen. That expectation, quiet, unresolved, and enduring, may be the true purpose of Aramumuru. Not to open a path through stone, but to open a space in the human mind. El Fuerte de Samaipata. On the eastern edge of the Andes, where high mountains begin to dissolve into forest and cloud, there is a place that does not behave like a ruin. There are no collapsed walls, no fallen columns, no broken cities to reconstruct in the imagination. Instead, there is a mountain, reshaped. This is Samaipata. At its center lies a single enormous sandstone outcrop, more than 200 meters long, carved directly into the living rock, not built upon, not quarried away, but transformed. Its surface cut, smoothed, and patterned with deliberate precision. This distinction matters. Samaipata is not architecture placed on land. It is land turned into architecture. The carved rock is etched with channels, steps, niches, geometric grooves, and zoomorphic figures that stretch across the surface in a way that feels both ordered and fluid. There is no single focal point, meaning here is distributed, revealed only through movement. You do not arrive at Samaipata and understand it immediately. You walk it. Water channels run across the stone in carefully calculated paths. Their slopes are shallow, consistent, and intentional. During rainfall, water flows exactly where the builders intended, accelerating in narrow grooves, slowing in wider basins, disappearing into carved depressions. This is not decorative drainage. It is hydraulic design. The channels intersect with symbolic carvings, serpents, felines, abstract forms, suggesting that water was not just managed, but ritualized. Rain activated the site. Stone and water worked together, briefly, before returning to stillness. This implies anticipation. The builders understood that the site would only fully reveal itself under certain conditions. Like many ancient ceremonial places, Samaipata was not meant to function constantly. It was meant to wait. The scale of carving raises immediate questions. Sandstone is workable, but carving an entire ridge with consistent depth, alignment, and finish requires planning across years. Mistakes could not be hidden. Every cut remained visible, yet the surface feels coherent. This tells us that Samaipata was not carved randomly or incrementally. It was executed according to a vision that existed before the first cut was made. Someone saw the finished form in the stone. Animal figures emerged subtly from the rock, not sculpted in full relief, but suggested through shallow carving. They blend into channels and steps, becoming visible only at certain angles or under changing light. This restraint is important. The builders were not trying to dominate the stone. They were collaborating with it. Samaipata also resists easy cultural classification. The site predates Inca control, though the Inca later incorporated it into their network. Notably, they did not erase or overwrite the carved rock. They built nearby, around it, leaving the central feature intact. That choice is revealing. The Inca were master builders. They replaced inferior structures without hesitation. When they encountered something they did not fully understand, or deeply respected, they adapted instead. Samaipata appears to have commanded that respect. The site occupies a liminal zone, geographically and culturally. It sits between Andean highland civilizations and Amazonian lowland societies. This position likely made it a meeting place, a boundary, a threshold. And thresholds matter. There are no large enclosures here, no defensive walls. The power of Samaipata does not come from exclusion. It comes from exposure. The carved rock lies open to sky, wind, and rain. It interacts constantly with the environment. Erosion has softened some edges, but the overall design remains legible. a testament to both material choice and construction foresight. The builders accepted time as a participant. What is especially striking is how movement is guided across the stone. Steps lead nowhere obvious. Channels cross paths unexpectedly. Flat platforms invite pause without instruction. There is no prescribed route. You choose. This suggests that ritual here was personal rather than collective, experiential rather than performative. The rock does not tell you what to believe. It invites you to engage. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Samapata stands apart because it represents a different philosophy of engineering. Not vertical, not monumental, but integrative. Engineering that works with water, gravity, and erosion, rather than resisting them. Engineering that uses the landscape itself as material, rather than treating it as foundation alone. Standing on the carved rock today, the experience is quiet and unsettling. You sense intention everywhere, but explanation nowhere. The site does not declare its purpose, it withholds it. That withholding may be deliberate. Samaipata reminds us that some ancient knowledge was not meant to be explained, only enacted. Meaning was not delivered through text or iconography, but through movement, weather, and time. Stone becomes process. Process becomes ritual. Ritual becomes memory. The carved rock does not dominate the land. It listens to it. And in doing so, Samaipata challenges a modern assumption. That advanced architecture must rise above the earth to be powerful. Here, power lies in restraint, in shaping only what is necessary, in allowing nature to finish the work, in trusting that those who arrive will understand enough, without being told. Samapata is not a monument to conquest or authority. It is a monument to relationship, between human intention and geological time, between ritual and environment, between what is known and what is deliberately left open. And that openness is why, centuries later, the carved rock still refuses to settle comfortably into history. It was never meant to. Acapana Pyramid. On the high altiplano of Bolivia, where the horizon feels impossibly wide and the air itself resists every breath, there rises a form that does not behave like a mountain, even though it looks like one. It is stepped. This is the Acapana Pyramid. From a distance, Acapana appears eroded, almost natural, its profile softened by time and weather. But as you move closer, the illusion dissolves. The symmetry reveals itself. The terraces align. The angles repeat. This is not geology. This is intention shaped into earth and stone. Acapana stands at the heart of the ancient city of Tiwanaku, a civilization that flourished long before the Inca, at nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. An environment so harsh that survival alone demands deep understanding of climate, water, and land. Yet here, people did more than survive. They planned. The pyramid is not a solid mass built upward in haste. It is a carefully terraced platform, constructed in stages, each level stabilizing the next, each slope calculated to manage weight, runoff, and erosion. Stone retaining walls frame earthen cores, locking the structure together while allowing flexibility in an earthquake-prone region. This is not brute force. This is environmental engineering. Acapana's most remarkable feature is not its height, but its internal water system, a network of stone-lined channels embedded within the pyramid itself. Rainfall and meltwater were captured, guided, slowed, and released with astonishing precision. Water did not attack the pyramid, it animated it. Channels cut into stone carried water across terraces, through internal passages, and out through controlled exits. The flow was deliberate, neither too fast to erode, nor too slow to stagnate. During heavy rains, Acapana became alive with movement, the sound of water echoing through hidden veins of stone. This was not accidental drainage, it was ritualized hydraulics. Water here symbolized power, fertility, and cosmic order. By mastering it, the builders of Acapana were not just protecting their monument. They were expressing control over the most precious and unpredictable force in their world. The pyramid shape reinforces this meaning. Its stepped form mirrors the surrounding mountains, suggesting a constructed counterpart to the natural landscape. Acapana does not compete with the Andes. It converses with them. At the summit once stood a sunken court, carefully leveled and framed, creating a space that felt both elevated and enclosed, separated from ordinary life, yet still open to the sky. Reaching this space required ascent, effort, and intention. Movement mattered. Every terrace slowed the body. Every step changed perspective. Every level increased separation from the everyday world below. This choreography is central to understanding Acapana. It was not a monument meant to be seen only from afar. It was meant to be experienced gradually, deliberately, and physically. The stones used in Acapana were transported from distant quarries, some weighing several tons. Their placement shows standardization. Blocks fit within repeated dimensions. Corners align. Courses remain consistent. This implies organization beyond small-scale labor. Someone measured, someone planned, someone coordinated. And yet, there is no evidence of kings or palaces dominating the site. Power here does not announce itself through elite residences. It manifests through shared construction, through collective effort focused on a central ceremonial form. Acapana was not built for one ruler. It was built for a worldview. Archaeological evidence suggests the pyramid was used over many centuries, modified and repaired as needed. When parts eroded, they were reinforced. When channels clogged, they were cleared. This maintenance revealed something crucial. The builders understood time. They knew this structure was not finished when construction ended. It would live, age, and require care, much like the society that depended on it. At some point, the pyramid was deliberately decommissioned. Stones were removed. Earth was allowed to erode. The system was shut down, not violently destroyed. This mirrors a pattern seen across Tiwanaku: intentional closure rather than collapse, meaning here was not eternal. It was cyclical. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Acapana stands as one of the clearest examples of integrated ancient intelligence, where architecture, hydrology, cosmology, and environment operate as a single system. Not technology separated from belief, not ritual separated from engineering. One system. Standing at Acapana today, silence dominates. Wind moves across broken stone. The channels are dry. The terraces no longer guide water. And yet, the logic of the design remains readable, even now. You can still see where water once flowed, where people once gathered, where effort was once focused upward. The pyramid does not need reconstruction to be understood. Its intelligence is still visible. Acapana challenges a modern assumption: that complexity must rely on advanced materials or machinery. Here, complexity emerges from coordination, observation, and restraint. No metal tools, no written plans, no engines. Just knowledge, applied patiently, at scale, in one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. The Acapana pyramid was not built to defy nature. It was built to work with it, to guide water, anchor Earth, and shape human movement into something meaningful. And in doing so, it quietly proves something uncomfortable. That long before history says humans were capable of such thinking, they were already building systems sophisticated enough to last, not because they were indestructible, but because they were understood, stone by stone, channel by channel, generation by generation. That is Acapana's legacy. Marcahuasi Plateau, high above the Rimac Valley, more than 4,000 meters above sea level, there is a plateau where the land itself seems to hesitate between geology and intention, a place where stone forms appear to pause mid-thought, as if shaped by forces that understood how the human mind recognizes pattern long before the word pattern ever existed. This is Marcahuasi. Reaching the plateau requires effort even today, and that difficulty is part of its meaning, because nothing here was meant to be stumbled upon accidentally, and nothing here reveals itself all at once. The ascent strips away noise, oxygen, and distraction, until what remains is wind, sky, and an expanse of stone that refuses to settle into a single explanation. Marcahuasi is not a city, not a ruin, not a structure built in the conventional sense. It is a vast natural plateau scattered with colossal stone forms that resemble faces, animals, monuments, and figures standing upright against the sky. Some appear unmistakably human. Others seem to shift depending on light, distance, and angle, transforming slowly as the sun moves across the horizon. What unsettles most visitors is not the resemblance itself, but the consistency of it. Across kilometers of exposed stone, the same visual language repeats. Profiles, eyes, mouths, heads oriented toward specific directions, forms aligned along ridges, edges, and overlooks, as if the plateau were curated rather than eroded. Geology offers part of the explanation. The plateau is composed primarily of volcanic rock shaped by uplift, weathering, and freeze-thaw cycles over immense spans of time. Wind sculpts, water infiltrates, temperature fractures stone along natural fault lines. These processes can occasionally create striking shapes. But Marcahuasi is not occasional, it is continuous. What complicates the natural explanation is placement. Many of the most striking formations appear at points of maximum visibility, overlooking valleys, framing distant mountains, or aligning with sunrise and sunset during key times of year. They are not hidden in random crevices. They occupy dominant positions on the plateau, as if chosen. This has led some researchers to propose that Marcahuasi was not carved in the traditional sense, but recognized and emphasized. Ancient people may have identified naturally suggestive forms and subtly altered them, clearing surrounding rock, accentuating edges, or simply preserving certain shapes through repeated visitation while others eroded away. This kind of interaction leaves almost no archaeological signature, no cut blocks, no debris piles, no obvious tools, only intention expressed through selection. And selection is one of the oldest forms of intelligence. The plateau shows signs of prolonged human presence. Hearths, pathways, and occupation zones indicate that people returned here repeatedly over long periods. Not to build permanent settlements, but to gather, observe, and remain temporarily within this unusual stone landscape. Marcahuasi was not lived in, it was experienced. The scale of the plateau reinforces this idea. It is vast, open, and exposed. Harsh winds sweep across it without warning. Temperatures drop suddenly. This is not a place suited for daily life. It is a place suited for ritual time, moments set apart from routine existence. The stone forms themselves encourage stillness. People stop walking. They look. They turn slowly. The mind begins to search for recognition, and once recognition begins, it does not stop easily. A face becomes two. An animal becomes a figure. A figure becomes something else entirely as shadows shift. This is not confusion. It is engagement. Marcahuasi activates perception rather than instructing it. There are no signs telling you what to see, no carvings labeling meaning. Interpretation arises naturally, shaped by the observer's position, patience, and movement. This suggests a sophisticated understanding of human cognition. The builders, or rather the curators of this space, may have understood that meaning does not need to be explained to be powerful. It only needs to be invited. The plateau also shows alignment with celestial events. Certain formations frame the rising and setting sun during solstices, while others align with cardinal directions when viewed from specific vantage points. These alignments are subtle, not engineered with straight lines or constructed markers, but achieved through the positioning of natural stone forms within the landscape. This again suggests selection over construction. Marcahuasi becomes most revealing at dawn and dusk, when light skims across stone rather than striking it directly. Relief emerges. Shadows deepen. Shapes clarify briefly before dissolving again. The plateau feels alive during these moments, as if it responds to time itself. This responsiveness matters. In many ancient cultures, places that changed with light were considered powerful because they demonstrated interaction between earth and sky, Marcahuasi does this continuously, without mechanical devices, without moving parts, relying only on stone and the movement of the sun. Standing on the plateau during these hours, the sensation is not dramatic. It is contemplative. Silence stretches. Wind moves through gaps in rock. The figures seem to watch without expression. Whether Marcahuasi was intentionally shaped, selectively preserved, or simply revered for what nature provided, its importance lies in how it was used, not how it was made. This site suggests a stage in human development where architecture was not yet about imposing order on the land, but about recognizing order already present and choosing to return to it again and again. In a series exploring prehistoric structures and landscapes that appear beyond modern expectations, Marcahuasi stands as a reminder that intelligence does not always leave behind walls, platforms, or monuments. Sometimes it leaves behind places that change how humans think when they enter them, places that slow perception, places that reward patience, places that resist certainty. Marcahuasi does not demand belief in lost civilizations or forgotten technologies. It demands something far more uncomfortable: attention. Attention to how humans respond to shape, to scale, to silence. Because if ancient people understood how stone could guide perception without being reshaped extensively, then the history of architecture begins much earlier and much more subtly than we often admit. Marcahuasi is not a puzzle to be solved. It is a question that continues to ask itself every time light touches stone differently than it did the day before. And perhaps that is why, after centuries of wind and weather, people still climb to this plateau, stand among the figures, and feel the same quiet certainty that something here was never meant to be random, not built, but chosen. That is the enduring power of Marcahuasi. Sechin Bajo. In the dry Casma Valley of coastal Peru, where rivers cut narrow paths through desert and the land offers little forgiveness, there is a site that quietly dismantles one of archaeology's most comfortable assumptions: that large, organized construction only begins after agriculture, hierarchy, and complex states are firmly in place. This is Sechin Bajo. At first glance, the ruins appear modest: low stone walls, buried platforms, eroded edges softened by time. There is nothing immediately imposing here. No towering pyramid rising cleanly into the sky. No carved reliefs announcing power or conquest. And yet, beneath this restraint lies something far more disruptive. Sechin Bajo is one of the oldest monumental constructions in the Americas, with dates reaching back more than 5,000 years into the pre-ceramic period, a time when people were not supposed to be building large ceremonial architecture at all. But they did. The core of Sechin Bajo consists of carefully planned stone platforms arranged around open ceremonial spaces. These were not temporary structures. They were designed, rebuilt, expanded, and maintained across generations, each phase respecting the geometry and orientation of what came before. This continuity matters. It means that the builders were not improvising. They were working within a shared architectural language, one that already understood proportion, symmetry, and spatial control. The platforms were constructed using stone-faced walls filled with earth and smaller rocks, creating stable masses that resisted collapse while allowing flexibility in a seismically active region. Corners were reinforced. Levels were aligned. Axes were maintained. This is not accidental organization. It is applied knowledge. What makes Sechin Bajo especially unsettling is its chronology. These platforms were in use long before pottery, metallurgy, or written language appeared in the region. The people who built them lived in a world still dominated by seasonal rhythms, fishing, foraging, and early cultivation. Yet they invested enormous effort into shaping ceremonial space. This suggests a reversal of the usual narrative. Here, ritual did not follow surplus. Surplus followed ritual. The central spaces at Sechin Bajo were not enclosed temples. They were open, accessible areas designed for gathering rather than exclusion. Movement through the site was guided subtly by elevation changes and wall placement, creating a sense of progression without confinement. You approached. You ascended slightly. You entered. This choreography is deliberate. Architecture here shaped behavior without imposing force. There are no defensive walls, no signs of violence, no elite residences dominating the complex. Power was expressed communally, not individually. Sechin-Baho appears to have been a place people returned to repeatedly, seasonally, ritually, collectively. Each visit reinforced memory. Each rebuilding reinforced tradition. Over time, layers accumulated. Floors were resurfaced. Walls were thickened. Platforms were expanded outward rather than upward, emphasizing stability over spectacle. This horizontal monumentality is a hallmark of early Andean architecture. Rather than rising dramatically, Sechin-Baho spreads quietly, embedding itself into the valley floor until it feels inseparable from the land itself. Archaeological excavations reveal precise construction sequences. Stones were placed methodically. Fill was compacted deliberately. Repairs were made before failure occurred. This implies oversight. Someone understood load. Someone understood time. Someone understood that these structures needed to last. What is equally important is what Sechin-Baho does not show. There is no clear evidence of centralized authority, kingship, or coercive control. The scale of construction suggests cooperation rather than command. People chose to build this. That choice challenges long-held assumptions about early society. It suggests that shared belief and ritual identity were powerful enough to mobilize labor long before formal political systems emerged. In this way, Sechin-Baho belongs to a growing group of ancient sites that force us to rethink causality in human history. Civilization did not begin with cities, rulers, or writing. It began with gathering, with people agreeing that a place mattered enough to shape stone around it. Standing among the ruins today, the experience is subtle. The walls are low. The platforms are broad. The desert wind moves freely. Nothing feels closed or oppressive. Instead, the site feels balanced. That balance is intentional. Sechin-Baho was never meant to intimidate. It was meant to endure, physically and socially. Its architecture stabilizes ground, guides movement, and holds space for repeated human presence across centuries. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Sechin-Baho is essential because it demonstrates that sophisticated planning does not require advanced tools or rigid hierarchies. It requires agreement. It requires memory. It requires patience. The builders of Sechin-Baho understood that stone could anchor time itself, that by shaping the ground where people gathered, they could shape how communities persisted. Long after daily life changed, long after languages shifted, long after the builders themselves disappeared. The ruins remain not because they were indestructible, but because they were understood well enough to be rebuilt, respected well enough to be preserved, and quiet enough to wait for us to finally notice what they have been saying all along. That complex human organization did not suddenly appear. It was already here, laid carefully into stone 5,000 years ago beneath the desert sun of the Kasma Valley. And Sechin-Baho still holds that truth, patiently in its lowest walls and widest platforms, Barabar caves. In the low granite hills of Bihar, where the landscape appears quiet, ancient, and unremarkable at first glance, there exists a set of chambers that do not behave like anything else from their time. They are not decorated. They are not expansive. They do not rise toward the sky or spread across the land. Instead, they disappear into stone. These are the Barabar caves. From the outside, the hills look natural, weathered granite domes shaped by time, heat, and erosion. Nothing suggests that the interior hides one of the most technically perplexing achievements of the ancient world. But the moment you step inside, the contrast is immediate and absolute. The rough, fractured surface of the mountain vanishes, and in its place appears perfection. The interior walls of the Barabar caves are cut into solid granite and polished to a mirror-like finish so smooth that light reflects across the surface as if it were glass. Not partially smooth, not approximately even. Perfectly smooth. Granite is one of the hardest natural stones on Earth, ranking high on the Mohs scale due to its quartz content. Shaping it is difficult. Polishing it to this degree, especially on curved surfaces inside enclosed chambers, is something that even modern stoneworkers approach with industrial tools and powered abrasives. Yet these caves were completed more than 2,300 years ago. The caves are traditionally dated to the 3rd century BCE and attributed to the Mauryan Empire during the reign of Emperor Ashoka, who donated several of them to the Ajivika ascetic sect. Inscriptions carved near the entrances confirm this donation. But the inscriptions raise a quiet problem. They are crude. The lettering is shallow, uneven, and visibly less refined than the stone surfaces they sit upon. This contrast is striking. The text looks almost out of place against walls finished with extraordinary precision. This suggests something uncomfortable, that the inscriptions may be later additions to spaces whose technical sophistication predates their recorded use. Inside the caves, geometry dominates. Chambers are shaped into precise ovals, rectangles, and domes. Corners transition smoothly into walls. Ceilings curve without distortion. The symmetry is exact enough that modern engineers have measured deviations of only fractions of a millimeter. This is not hand-worn irregularity. This is control. Standard explanations suggest that the caves were carved using iron tools and then polished through prolonged abrasion, using sand, water, and plant fibers. In theory, this is possible. In practice, it raises serious questions. Hand polishing granite evenly across large curved surfaces almost always leaves subtle waves, inconsistencies, or directional marks. At Barabar, such imperfections are absent. The polish is uniform, reflective, and continuous, even in areas that are difficult to reach. There are no visible tool marks, no corrective cuts, no abandoned errors. Everything appears final. The precision of the carving also implies advanced planning. You cannot correct mistakes easily when working inside solid granite. Once material is removed, it cannot be replaced. This means the final form had to be understood before carving began. Someone envisioned the completed chamber in advance and executed it without deviation. Beyond visual perfection, the caves possess another remarkable feature: acoustics. Sound behaves unusually inside these chambers. A clap or chant produces a prolonged resonance that seems to wrap around the listener, amplifying low frequencies and sustaining vibration far longer than expected. This is not accidental. The elliptical shapes, polished surfaces, and enclosed volumes work together to create controlled reverberation. The caves act as acoustic chambers, capable of enhancing chants or hums into immersive sensory experiences. This suggests that the builders understood how shape and surface affect sound, not symbolically, physically. Some researchers have proposed that the caves were designed specifically for meditative practices involving vibration and resonance. The Ajivika sect emphasized asceticism, determinism, and inward focus, beliefs that would align with environments that isolate, amplify, and internalize sound. But again, belief alone does not explain execution. The engineering comes first. What makes Barabar especially unsettling is that there are no clear transitional examples. We do not see earlier caves experimenting with this level of polish. We do not see later caves surpassing it. The Barabar caves appear suddenly, fully realized, and then the technique largely disappears. This is an isolated peak. In archaeology, isolated peaks are difficult to explain. They suggest either lost knowledge, highly specialized labor, or a tradition that did not continue long enough to leave a broad material trail. None of these explanations are comfortable. Standing inside the cave today, the experience is disorienting. The walls reflect movement subtly. Sound feels heavier. The sense of enclosure is complete, yet not oppressive. The stone does not feel ancient. It feels intentional. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Barabar caves stand apart because they challenge not scale, but precision. They do not overwhelm through size. They unsettle through finish. They force a simple question: how? How was this level of stoneworking achieved, sustained, and completed without leaving behind the tools or intermediate stages we would expect? How was knowledge transmitted so cleanly, and then lost so completely? The caves do not answer these questions. They simply persist. The granite has not dulled. The polish has not eroded. The geometry remains exact. Time has been unusually gentle with these spaces, as if recognizing that they were built to endure. Barabar reminds us that ancient technology did not always announce itself through monuments visible from miles away. Sometimes it hid underground, quiet, refined, and confident enough to require no explanation. Stone shaped beyond necessity. Precision applied without display. Engineering serving experience rather than spectacle. These caves were not meant to impress future generations. They were meant to function perfectly in their own time. And in doing so, they left behind one of the most uncomfortable legacies in archaeology. Proof that long before modern industry, humans were capable of working stone with a mastery that still resists easy explanation. Barabar does not rewrite history loudly. It does something far more powerful. It waits, polished, silent, and unchanged, inviting us to explain not what ancient people believed, but what they were capable of doing. And so far, that explanation remains unfinished. Yangshan Quarry. Just beyond the modern outskirts of Nanjing, where forested hills quietly surround the remnants of imperial ambition, there is a place where stone tells a story not of success, but of limits. A rare moment in history where human intention stopped mid-gesture and never resumed. This is the abandoned giant of Yangshan Quarry. Unlike ruins shaped by collapse, invasion, or erosion, Yangshan is frozen in time. The work was not destroyed. It was not repurposed. It was simply left behind, enormous, precise, and unfinished, as if the builders walked away and never returned. At the heart of the quarry lie three colossal stone elements, each carved directly from the living mountain. Together, they were meant to form a single monumental stele, a ceremonial stone slab intended to honor the father of the Ming dynasty's founding emperor in the early 15th century. The ambition was unprecedented. The base alone weighs an estimated 16,000 tons, making it one of the heaviest stone objects ever attempted in human history. Even today, with modern cranes and transport infrastructure, moving a single piece of this mass would be considered extreme. And yet, the decision to create it was made deliberately. The quarry walls reveal methodical planning. Channels were cut cleanly around the blocks. Separation lines are straight and controlled. Tool marks show consistent technique, not frantic effort. This was not reckless overconfidence. It was calculated ambition. Each component of the stele, the base, the body, and the capstone, was carved to exact proportions, designed to fit together once transported. The surfaces are flat, the edges are sharp. The scale is staggering, but the workmanship remains refined. This is what makes Yangshan unsettling. The builders clearly knew how to carve stone at massive scale. They had experience quarrying, shaping, and finishing large blocks. Nothing about the carving suggests uncertainty or improvisation. The failure did not occur in the quarry. It occurred in logistics. Once the blocks were freed from the mountain, the reality became unavoidable. There was no feasible way to move them across uneven terrain to their intended destination. Roads could not support the weight. Rollers would collapse. Water transport was impractical. At some point, someone did the math, and the project stopped. What followed is extraordinary. In most ancient contexts, unfinished stone is reused, broken down, or repurposed. At Yangshan, nothing was touched. The blocks were abandoned exactly where they lay, still partially attached to the bedrock, still bearing the marks of final preparation. This suggests something profound. The scale crossed a threshold where correction was no longer possible. The stones were too large to fix, too large to reuse, and too symbolic to destroy. So they were left, a silent admission of limits by one of the most powerful states of its time, walking through Yangshan. Today is disorienting. Human scale collapses. The blocks dwarf trees. Tool marks appear delicate against surfaces larger than buildings. The contrast between precision and mass creates a sense of suspended intention. This was not failure through ignorance. It was failure through excess confidence. And that is what makes Yangshan so important in a series about ancient structures that challenge modern expectations. It does not suggest lost technology or mysterious machines. It shows something more honest, that ancient engineers pushed boundaries aggressively, sometimes beyond what reality allowed. They were willing to attempt the impossible. The quarry also preserves rare insight into ancient project planning. The uniformity of carving suggests centralized oversight. Measurements were standardized. Work was coordinated across teams. This was state-level engineering, not local experimentation. Yangshan proves that ancient civilizations were not merely reactive builders. They planned big. They calculated. They took risks. And sometimes they stopped. The abandoned giant stands as a counterpoint to monuments that succeeded. It reminds us that history is shaped not only by what was completed, but by what was attempted. Standing beside the unfinished stele, the silence feels deliberate. There is no myth carved into the stone, no inscription explaining the abandonment. The mountain simply holds the moment where ambition met physical reality. In a strange way, Yangshan feels modern. It reflects the same tension we face today, between vision and feasibility, between symbolic power and practical limits. The difference is that here, the evidence remains untouched, preserved because it was too large to erase. The abandoned giant of Yangshan Quarry does not tell us that ancient people lacked ability. It tells us they had enough ability to almost go too far. And in that hesitation, that decision to stop, we see something rarely preserved in archaeology, a moment of restraint, stone left unraised, power left unproclaimed, ambition halted by reality. Yangshan stands not as a monument to an emperor, but as a monument to the boundary between what humans imagine and what stone allows. And thousands of years later, that boundary is still there, carved cleanly into the side of a mountain, waiting for us to notice what it truly represents. Hamonga, Amaui. On the eastern edge of the island of Tongatapu, where the Pacific stretches unbroken toward the horizon and the rhythm of wind and tide sets the pace of life, 3 massive stones stand in silence, arranged with such restraint that their presence feels intentional rather than monumental, as if the builders understood that precision alone would be enough. This is Hamonga, Amaui. There are no surrounding walls here, no enclosures, no ruins of a city to contextualize the structure, only open land and sky, which makes the trilithon impossible to ignore because it has nothing to compete with, and because its simplicity invites questions rather than answers. 2 upright limestone pillars support a single horizontal lintel, forming a gateway nearly 6 meters high, each stone weighing several tons, quarried, shaped, transported, and raised without metal tools, without wheels, and without draft animals, relying instead on knowledge, coordination, and a deep familiarity with stone and leverage. This was not stacking. It was placement. The stones interlock through carved notches that stabilize the lintel against movement, a technique that prevents lateral slippage during storms and earthquakes, both of which are common in the region, suggesting that the builders understood forces acting on stone over time, not just in the moment of construction. The monument is traditionally dated to around the 13th century CE and associated with the Tuitonga dynasty, a powerful maritime society whose influence spread across much of the South Pacific. But oral traditions carried by the Tongan people speak of deeper memory, attributing the structure to the demigod Maui, who in Polynesian cosmology is a bringer of land, knowledge, and order. Myth here does not replace engineering, it frames it. What elevates Hamonga, a Maui beyond a feat of stone lifting, is its alignment. At specific times of year, the rising and setting sun passes cleanly through the trilithon, marking solstices with quiet accuracy. These alignments are not approximate. They are precise enough to require long-term observation of the sun's movement across seasons and years. This implies patience. Someone watched the horizon carefully, recorded change through memory rather than writing, and translated celestial movement into stone, fixing time into a form that would outlast generations. For Polynesian cultures, the sky was not abstract. It was navigational, practical, and sacred. Stars guided ocean voyages across thousands of kilometers. The sun dictated seasons, planting cycles, and ritual calendars. Ha'amonga. A Maui appears to anchor this sky knowledge into the land itself, turning a mobile observational tradition into a permanent reference point. Stone became memory. The form of the trilithon also suggests passage, but not in a physical sense. Walking beneath the lintel does not lead to another space. There is no courtyard beyond, no chamber waiting on the other side. The act of passing through is symbolic, marking transition rather than arrival. This distinction matters. In many ancient cultures, gateways signified change in status, time, or state of being. You did not walk through to reach somewhere else. You walked through to become something else. The open landscape surrounding the monument reinforces this idea. There is no attempt to control access or restrict movement. The power of the site comes not from exclusion, but from alignment, from being in the right place at the right time, under the right sky. Transporting the stones required coordinated labor on a scale that implies strong social cohesion. Ropes, rollers, earthen ramps, and synchronized effort would have been necessary, all guided by shared understanding rather than written instruction. This suggests leadership, but also consent, because monuments of this nature cannot be raised by force alone. People had to believe in the act. The restraint of the design is striking. No carvings decorate the stone. No symbols announce ownership or conquest. The stones are left largely unadorned, allowing form and placement to carry meaning. This is confidence. A society secure enough in its worldview does not need to explain it to stone. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Ha'amonga, a Maui, stands as evidence that advanced knowledge does not always express itself through complexity. Sometimes it expresses itself through reduction, through removing everything unnecessary until only what matters remains. 3 stones. 1 alignment. Enduring significance. Standing beneath the trilithon today, the experience is subtle. There is no dramatic revelation, no overwhelming sense of scale, and yet the structure commands attention because it interacts with time itself. The light changes, the shadow shifts, the moment arrives and passes. You have to wait. That waiting mirrors the worldview of the builders, people who measured life through cycles rather than deadlines, through return rather than progress, through repetition rather than expansion. Ha'amonga, a Maui, does not argue against history. It quietly reframes it. It shows that societies without writing, without metal, and without cities could still observe, calculate, coordinate, and construct with a level of intention that feels unmistakably advanced, even by modern standards. The trilithon remains because it was placed correctly, not because it was built excessively. It resists storms not through mass alone, but through balance. It holds meaning not through inscription, but through alignment. Stone holding sky, sky marking time, time shaping memory. That is the logic encoded here. And long after the canoes stopped arriving from distant islands, long after the political power of the Tui Tonga faded, the stones remain exactly where they were set, still waiting for the sun to return, to the same place on the horizon, exactly as it always does, exactly as the builders knew it would. That certainty, fixed into stone at the edge of the Pacific, may be the most powerful legacy Ha'amonga a Maui offers. A reminder that ancient intelligence often expressed itself not by trying to control the world, but by learning how to stand in perfect alignment with it. Ponce Monolith. On the high plateau of the Bolivian Altiplano, where the land stretches wide and the air thins until even simple movement feels deliberate, a single stone figure stands upright, balanced and unmoved by centuries of wind, frost, and seismic unrest, quietly occupying a space that once formed the ceremonial heart of one of the most enigmatic civilizations in the ancient world. This is the Ponce monolith of Tiwanaku. At first encounter, the statue appears restrained, almost severe, a tall rectangular form carved into a human silhouette, arms folded inward, hands gripping ritual objects whose meaning has not survived in words. while the face remains calm, symmetrical, and unreadable, as if deliberately stripped of personal identity. That restraint is intentional. The Ponce monolith was carved from a single block of andesite, a volcanic stone significantly harder than limestone or sandstone, chosen not for ease of work, but for durability, stability, and permanence. Qualities that mattered deeply to a society living at nearly 4,000 meters above sea level in an environment where survival depended on precise knowledge of time, water, and climate. Working andesite is unforgiving. Errors cannot be corrected. Surfaces resist shaping. And yet, the statue's proportions are exact. Vertical lines remain straight from base to crown. The geometry of the body is balanced so precisely that the monolith stands without visible lean, despite centuries of ground movement and temperature extremes. This stability is not accidental. It reflects an understanding of mass distribution and center of gravity that goes far beyond aesthetic concern. The monolith does not simply stand, it endures. The surface of the statue is covered in carved symbols arranged with careful repetition, geometric motifs layered over the body like a garment made of code rather than cloth. These carvings are not random decoration. They repeat across Tiwanaku's architecture, ceramics, and stonework, forming a visual language that suggests shared meaning understood by those who lived here. Meaning that did not need explanation. The hands of the figure hold objects that have been interpreted as staffs, ritual tools, or symbols of authority. But what matters more than their identification is their placement. The posture is formal, controlled, and inward-facing, suggesting containment rather than display. This is not a ruler carved for admiration. It is a role carved for continuity. The face of the Ponce monolith is especially unsettling in its neutrality. The eyes are wide and forward-facing, the mouth closed, the expression unchanged. There is no attempt to convey emotion, personality, or movement. The figure exists outside time, frozen into a state that does not age, react, or respond. This timelessness matters. Tiwanaku society depended on cyclical knowledge. Seasonal flooding, frost patterns, and solar cycles determined whether crops survived or failed. In such a world, stability was sacred. Change was dangerous. Continuity was power. The monolith reflects that worldview. It stands as a fixed reference point within a carefully planned ceremonial landscape, composed of sunken courts, platforms, and aligned structures that guided movement and attention. Space here was choreographed. You did not wander randomly. You were directed, subtly, through elevation changes and sightlines. The Ponce monolith was part of the system. It did not dominate the space through height alone. It anchored it symbolically. Standing near the statue, one senses that it was not meant to be approached casually. Its presence creates pause, encouraging stillness rather than interaction. This suggests ritual use. The monolith likely functioned as a mediator between worlds, not in a mythical sense alone, but in a social and cosmological one. It embodied order, permanence, and balance in a society that depended on those qualities to survive an unforgiving environment. What makes the Ponce monolith particularly challenging to explain is how little we know about the civilization that created it, despite the sophistication of their stonework. Tiwanaku left no deciphered writing. No historical accounts describe its rituals directly. Its people vanished, leaving stone to speak in their place, and the stone speaks clearly. The carving techniques used here show consistent depth, clean edges, and precise repetition. This implies standardized methods and trained specialists. Stoneworking at Tiwanaku was not occasional craftsmanship, it was institutional knowledge. That knowledge appears across the site, in massive stone blocks fitted with near-perfect joints, in drainage systems integrated into architecture, and in monoliths like this one that combine artistry with engineering discipline. The Ponce monolith is not isolated. It belongs to a broader tradition of upright stone figures at Tiwanaku, each contributing to a visual and spatial language that emphasized order over individuality. Together, they created a landscape of presence rather than narrative. They did not tell stories. They established conditions. Standing before the monolith today, the experience is quiet but deeply unsettling. The statue does not demand interpretation. It resists it. You are left with form, proportion, and silence, and the sense that this figure was never meant to explain itself. That resistance is powerful. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Ponce monolith stands as evidence that ancient intelligence did not always express itself through complexity or ornamentation. Sometimes it expressed itself through control, of material, of space, of meaning. This statue was not carved to impress outsiders. It was carved to stabilize a worldview. Long after the fields dried, long after the ceremonial courts fell silent, the monolith remained upright, continuing to perform the function it was given, to hold order in place, to mark continuity, to remind those who stood near it that some things were meant to remain unchanged. Stone does not forget easily, and the Ponce monolith, standing calmly against the thin air of the Altiplano, still carries the weight of a civilization that understood something essential. That endurance is not achieved through motion, but through balance. That lesson, carved into andesite and left standing for centuries, may be the clearest message Tiwanaku ever left behind. Not written, not spoken, but held. Megalithic temples of Malta. In the middle of the Mediterranean Sea, on islands so small they can disappear into the horizon within minutes of sailing, there exists a group of stone structures that quietly disrupt almost everything we assume about the origins of monumental architecture. These are the megalithic temples of Malta. They do not rise dramatically like pyramids, nor do they sprawl like cities. And yet they are older than Stonehenge, older than the Great Pyramid of Giza, and older than nearly every monumental structure still standing on Earth today. Some of these temples were already ancient when Egypt was still experimenting with mud brick. That fact alone demands attention. The Maltese temples were constructed between roughly 3600 and 2500 BCE, during a period when the islands were isolated, resource limited, and inhabited by a relatively small population. There were no metals, no wheeled vehicles, no draft animals, and yet enormous limestone blocks weighing several tons were quarried, transported, shaped, and assembled with astonishing precision. This was not accidental development, it was sustained tradition. The temples follow a distinctive architectural plan that repeats across multiple sites: Gantija, Hagar Chim, Menajdra, Tarxian, each composed of curved clover-like chambers arranged symmetrically around a central axis, with carefully aligned entrances and thresholds that guide movement inward. Straight lines are rare. Curves dominate. This choice matters because curved stone walls are significantly harder to build and stabilize than straight ones, especially using massive blocks and no mortar. The builders intentionally chose the more difficult option, suggesting that form carried meaning beyond structural necessity. The walls themselves are constructed from 2 layers of stone with a rubble core between them, a technique that increases stability while conserving material. This shows an understanding of load distribution and internal pressure that feels remarkably mature for such an early period. Stone was not stacked. It was engineered. Doorways within the temples are framed with massive upright slabs capped by horizontal lintels, forming trilithon-style thresholds that echo later structures found thousands of kilometers away. These openings control light, sound, and movement, creating transitions between spaces that feel deliberate rather than accidental. You do not wander through these temples. You progress. Many of the temples are aligned with celestial events, particularly solstices and equinoxes. At Menajdra, sunlight enters the temple at precise times of year, illuminating specific stones and chambers while leaving others in shadow. These effects are subtle, not theatrical, and require careful observation to notice, which suggests long-term planning. Someone watched the sky for years, perhaps generations, before committing stone to place. Knowledge here was cumulative, passed on, refined, and trusted enough to be made permanent. Inside the temples, carved stone altars, spirals, and reliefs appear, abstract, repetitive, and rhythmic. These are not narrative scenes. They do not tell stories. They reinforce patterns. Pattern over image, order over depiction. This reflects a worldview centered on cycles, of seasons, life, death, and return. The temples feel less like places of worship in the modern sense, and more like instruments designed to synchronize human activity with natural rhythms. Sound behaves differently inside these spaces. The thick walls dampen external noise while amplifying low-frequency resonance. A voice spoken softly can carry farther than expected. A hum can fill a chamber and linger. This acoustic quality was not incidental. It suggests that ritual here involved voice, vibration, and presence rather than spectacle. What remains most puzzling is what happens next. Around 2500 BCE, the temple building culture disappears. Construction stops abruptly. The temples are not violently destroyed. They are not dramatically abandoned mid-build like Yangshan. They are simply left behind, intact, respected, and unused. A new culture arrives with different burial practices, different architecture, and no apparent interest in continuing the tradition. The knowledge vanishes. No gradual decline. No transitional forms. Just silence. This sudden disappearance challenges comfortable narratives of linear progress. The Maltese temple builders were not primitive ancestors slowly becoming advanced. They were already advanced, and then they were gone. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the megalithic temples of Malta stand as one of the clearest examples that complexity does not always accumulate. Sometimes it ends. Standing within these temples today, the experience is strangely intimate. The scale is human, not overwhelming. The stones feel close. The spaces curve around you. The outside world fades quickly. These were not monuments built to dominate others. They were built to contain experience. Stone-shaped to slow movement. Light-shaped to mark time. Space-shaped to focus attention inward. The builders of Malta did not leave behind writing, names, or myths we can read. But they left behind architecture that behaves intelligently, responding to sky, sound, and body in ways that still work thousands of years later. That functionality is the message. The temples do not ask to be admired. They ask to be entered slowly. And in doing so, they remind us of something modern history often struggles to accept. That long before empires, long before metallurgy, and long before written language, human societies were already capable of organizing labor, observing nature with precision, and translating abstract understanding into permanent stone. Not everywhere, not always. But here, on a small group of islands in the Mediterranean, where the sea isolated knowledge just long enough for it to rise, and then vanish, leaving behind some of the oldest standing stone temples on Earth. Quiet, balanced, unexplained, and still waiting for us to understand what kind of world was capable of building them. Derinkuyu Underground City. Beneath the soft volcanic landscape of Cappadocia, in a region where the earth itself is easy to carve but unforgiving to mistakes, there exists a city that does not rise toward the sky, does not announce itself on the horizon, and does not reveal its scale until you are already deep inside it. This is Derinkuyu. From the surface, there is almost nothing to see. A small opening in the ground, a modest entrance that gives no warning of what lies below. But once you descend, the space begins to unfold vertically, layer by layer, until it becomes clear that this is not a shelter, not a refuge carved in haste, but a deliberately planned underground city capable of sustaining thousands of people for extended periods of time. Derinkuyu reaches more than 60 meters below the surface and extends across at least 18 levels, each one carefully organized, each one connected by narrow passageways that control movement, flow, and access. This depth alone would be impressive, but depth is not the achievement here. System is. The city contains living quarters, food storage rooms, communal halls, wine and oil presses, kitchens with smoke channels designed to diffuse heat without revealing activity above ground, wells that access, groundwater without connecting directly to the surface, schools, chapels, and even stables positioned on upper levels to keep animals closer to fresh air. Nothing here is random. The layout follows logic. Ventilation shafts run vertically through the city, some more than 50 meters tall, providing fresh air to every level below. These shafts are not simple holes. They are carefully shaped to maintain airflow, regulate temperature, and prevent contamination. Even today, air circulates naturally through the system. This is environmental engineering executed underground. Water access was treated with equal care. Wells were carved deep into the bedrock, many of them isolated from the surface so that invaders could not poison them. The builders understood that survival underground depends not just on hiding, but on independence. Derinkuyu was designed to be sealed, and it could be sealed quickly. Massive circular stone doors, some weighing several hundred kilograms, were positioned at strategic choke points throughout the city. These doors could be rolled into place from the inside, blocking tunnels entirely, while still allowing defenders to observe or attack through small openings at the center. These are not symbolic defenses, they are practical. The narrow corridors leading between levels force anyone unfamiliar with the city to crouch, turn sideways, and move slowly, while residents who knew the layout could navigate efficiently. Height and width were used as defensive tools, shaping the human body itself into part of the security system. This city was not meant to be welcoming. It was meant to endure. The origins of Derinkuyu remain debated. Some evidence suggests early phases may date back to the Phrygian period, while later expansions are associated with Byzantine communities seeking refuge from invasion. What is clear is that the city was not built all at once. It was expanded intelligently. Each generation understood the existing system and extended it without breaking airflow, water access, or structural stability. This continuity of knowledge is critical. Underground mistakes are unforgiving. A collapsed tunnel, a blocked shaft, or a misjudged chamber could destroy everything above and below it. Yet Derinkuyu holds. The volcanic tuff of Cappadocia made carving possible, but it did not make planning optional. Weight distribution, ceiling thickness, and wall integrity had to be understood intuitively and respected consistently. This is not trial and error. This is mastery. What makes Derinkuyu especially unsettling is not that people hid underground, but that they planned to live there. Long-term habitation was expected. Food processing. Areas indicate preparation, not emergency rationing. Schools and chapels indicate community life, not temporary survival. This was not panic architecture, it was parallel civilization. The underground city connects to other subterranean complexes through long tunnels, suggesting regional coordination rather than isolated effort. Cappadocia was not dotted with random hideouts. It was threaded with an underground network, invisible from the surface, resilient against attack, and adaptable across centuries. Above ground, cities fell. Below ground, life continued. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, Derinkuyu stands as one of the clearest examples that advanced planning does not require modern materials or technology. It requires understanding human needs and environmental limits, and designing around them completely. Modern cities rely on buried systems we rarely think about: ventilation, sewage, water, power. Derinkuyu achieved the same conceptual integration without concrete, steel, or machinery, relying instead on stone, gravity, and airflow. And it worked. Standing deep within Derinkuyu today, the silence is heavy. The walls curve inward. Light fades quickly. You become aware of your breath, your steps, your orientation. The city controls your movement and your attention without force. That control is subtle. It does not intimidate through size. It disciplines through design. Derinkuyu forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about ancient intelligence. These builders did not simply react to danger. They anticipated it. They designed for worst-case scenarios and then refined those designs across generations. They were not hiding from the world. They were prepared for it. The underground city of stone is not a mystery because we do not know how it was carved. We know how stone can be cut. The mystery is how such a complete, resilient, and human-centered system could be conceived, maintained, and trusted without written blueprints or centralized modern administration. Knowledge here was embodied, passed through practice, preserved through use, protected through necessity. Derinkuyu does not challenge history by being unbelievable. It challenges history by being entirely believable. Once we accept that ancient people were capable of thinking far beyond the narrow categories we often assign to them. This city was not built in darkness. It was built with clarity. Clarity about danger. Clarity about survival. Clarity about how stone could be shaped into safety. And long after the surface world changed hands, languages shifted, and empires rose and fell, Derinkuyu remained below, silent, functional, and waiting, not as a relic of fear, but as evidence of foresight. Stone shaped into refuge, refuge shaped into society, society preserved underground. That is what Derinkuyu truly represents, not a hidden city, but a civilization that understood how to disappear without ever collapsing. Great enclosure of Great Zimbabwe, on a granite plateau in southeastern Africa, where boulders rise naturally from the earth and the land feels both ancient and deliberate, there stands a stone structure so carefully assembled that it reshaped how historians understand African prehistory, not because it was mysterious, but because it was undeniable. This is the great enclosure of Great Zimbabwe. It does not announce itself from a distance with height or spires. Instead, it reveals itself through scale, continuity, and control, a vast elliptical wall of stone that encloses space without enclosing explanation. Built not to be climbed, not to be defended in a conventional sense, but to exist as a statement of permanence. The Great Enclosure is the largest ancient stone structure south of the Sahara, constructed between the 11th and 15th centuries, during the height of the Zimbabwean civilization, a society that flourished through trade, agriculture, and regional authority long before European contact. And yet, for decades, history refused to accept that. The walls are built entirely without mortar, using millions of granite blocks shaped by hand, each one selected, trimmed, and placed so that weight and friction alone hold the structure together. The walls rise more than 10 meters high in places and extend for over 250 meters in length, curving smoothly without corners, breaks, or visible correction. This curvature matters. Straight walls crack. Curved walls distribute stress. The builders understood this instinctively. Granite is a difficult stone. It fractures unpredictably and resists shaping. Yet here, blocks are laid in even courses, their faces aligned, their joints tight enough that the wall behaves as a single mass rather than a stack of parts. This is not casual masonry. It is disciplined stonework. Within the enclosure lies a complex interior landscape, narrow passageways, open spaces, and the enigmatic conical tower, a solid stone structure, with no entrance, no chamber, and no clear functional explanation. It is not a lookout. It is not storage. It is not symbolic in any obvious way. And that ambiguity is essential. The great enclosure does not explain itself. It does not guide visitors through ritual movement as temples do. It does not fortify against attack like a fortress. Its power lies in containment rather than confrontation. Space here is controlled psychologically. The high walls block sightlines to the outside world, creating an interior that feels separate, intentional, and private. Sound behaves differently inside. Wind softens. The horizon disappears. You are no longer oriented by landscape, but by stone. This separation was meaningful. The enclosure likely functioned as a ceremonial and social focal point, possibly associated with elite authority, ritual gatherings, or symbolic order. But it was not a palace in the conventional sense. There are no thrones, no carvings of rulers, no inscriptions, declaring ownership. Authority here was expressed through craft. The chevron patterns embedded in sections of the wall are not decorative excess. They are controlled variations within repetition, signaling skill, identity, and continuity rather than individual authorship. This architecture does not celebrate a king, it celebrates a system. Great Zimbabwe thrived through long-distance trade, connecting the African interior with the Swahili coast and beyond. Gold, ivory, and goods moved outward. Ideas and materials moved inward. The enclosure reflects this stability. Not an isolated monument, but the architectural expression of a society confident in its place within a broader world. The construction process itself required massive coordination. Stones had to be quarried, shaped, transported, and placed with consistency across years, perhaps generations. This was not seasonal labor. It was sustained commitment. And yet, there is no evidence of forced labor or military enforcement. The scale suggests cooperation grounded in shared purpose rather than coercion. People believed in this place. What makes the great enclosure especially important in a series about structures that challenge modern expectations is how completely it contradicts outdated assumptions. For a long time, scholars refused to believe such architecture could be indigenous to sub-Saharan Africa. That refusal says more about modern bias than ancient capability. The stone does not lie. Standing inside the enclosure today, the experience is quiet and grounding. The walls do not overwhelm through height alone. They envelop through continuity. You feel held, not threatened. This is architecture designed to stabilize identity. The absence of inscriptions is telling, meaning here was not transmitted through text, but through presence. You did not need to read to understand that this space mattered. You felt it. In a series exploring prehistoric and ancient structures that appear beyond modern expectations, the Great Enclosure reminds us that complexity does not belong to one region, one culture, or one narrative of progress. It emerges wherever people organize knowledge, labor, and material with patience and intention. Stone placed carefully, space shaped deliberately, power expressed without spectacle. The enclosure endured not because it was indestructible, but because it was well conceived. When the society that built it eventually shifted, the walls were left intact, respected by those who came later. They did not need to be reused. They had already said enough. The Great Enclosure of Great Zimbabwe stands today not as a mystery that needs fantasy to explain it, but as a correction, a reminder that advanced stone architecture has always belonged to humanity as a whole, not just to the civilization's history once chose to celebrate. Here, in southern Africa, stone was shaped into order, memory, and quiet authority. And it remains, still enclosing space, still resisting erosion, still asking us to accept what it has always made clear. That history was never as simple as we were told. Gondeshapur. On the broad plains of Khuzestan, where rivers once braided through fertile land and trade routes stitched together empires, there are traces of a city whose influence far exceeded what remains visible today. A place remembered for knowledge and learning, yet anchored by something far more physical and quietly enduring. This is Gondeshapur. What survives above ground is fragmentary. Scattered walls, low mounds, broken stone. Nothing that announces greatness at first sight. And yet, beneath these modest remains lie stone substructures that reveal a city planned not only for growth and prestige, but for longevity, stability, and control over environment in a challenging landscape. Gondeshapur was founded in the Sasanian period, traditionally in the 3rd century CE, and later became famous as a center of learning, medicine, and scholarship, drawing intellectual traditions from Persia, Greece, India, and beyond. But before ideas could circulate here, before scholars could gather and teach, the city itself had to function. And that function began underground. Archaeological investigations have revealed substantial stone foundations beneath later brick and mud brick construction, indicating that key buildings rested on carefully prepared bases designed to stabilize structures against flooding, soil movement, and seasonal extremes. This was not decorative stonework, it was infrastructural. Khuzestan's environment demands respect. Seasonal rains can swell rivers suddenly, while heat and salinity challenge building materials year-round. Mud brick alone degrades quickly under these conditions. By anchoring important structures to stone substructures, the builders of Gondeshapur ensured that the city's core could endure where lighter construction would fail. This choice reflects foresight. Stone was used selectively where it mattered most, beneath walls, beneath courtyards, beneath spaces intended to last. Above ground, materials could change, be repaired, or replaced. Below ground, stability was fixed. This separation of permanence and adaptability is telling. The substructures are not uniform slabs. They are layered systems of stone courses, compacted fill, and leveled platforms that distribute weight evenly and resist subsidence. In places, drainage channels are integrated into these foundations, guiding water away from critical zones before it could undermine the city's fabric. Water, once again, becomes the deciding factor. As with many advanced ancient sites, the true intelligence of Gondishapur is expressed not in what rises upward, but in how the ground itself was disciplined. The builders understood that a city of learning could not thrive if its foundations failed, and so they invested effort where it would remain unseen. This invisibility matters. Stone substructures do not impress visitors. They do not convey power directly. Their success is measured by absence. The absence of collapse, the absence of failure, the absence of emergency repair. When they work, they disappear. The layout of Gondishapur suggests deliberate zoning, with major institutional and ceremonial areas placed on the most stable ground and reinforced with the strongest foundations. Residential and peripheral zones relied more heavily on lighter materials, allowing the city to expand and contract without compromising its core. This is urban planning, not improvisation. The reputation of Gondishapur as a center of medicine and learning often dominates discussion of the site, but that reputation rests on a physical reality that made sustained intellectual life possible. Scholars could gather here because the city was predictable, its buildings reliable, its water managed, its spaces stable across seasons. Stone made that possible. In a series exploring ancient structures that challenge modern expectations, Gondishapur's stone substructures remind us that sophistication does not always announce itself through spectacle. Sometimes it announces itself through continuity, through cities that function so well that their engineering fades into the background. The substructures also reflect a broader Sasanian tradition of integrating stone where strategic, brick where practical, and earth where adaptable, creating hybrid systems tuned to local conditions rather than ideological purity. This adaptability is a form of intelligence. Gondishapur was not frozen in time. It evolved, expanded, and absorbed influences. Yet its foundations remained, supporting change without resisting it. That balance between permanence and flexibility is one of the hardest achievements in any civilization. Standing on the site today, it is easy to overlook what lies beneath. The ground appears ordinary. The ruins feel quiet. But that quiet is earned. It is the quiet of a city that understood where effort mattered most. Not in ornament, not in excess, but in preparation. The stone, substructures of Gondishapur do not rewrite history dramatically. They do something subtler and more powerful. They show that ancient centers of knowledge were not sustained by ideas alone, but by engineering choices that protected those ideas from the realities of climate, time, and decay. Learning needs shelter. Shelter needs stability. Stability begins underground. And so, beneath the memory of scholars, physicians, and teachers whose names are lost, the stone remains. Still level, still bearing weight, still doing the work it was designed to do. Supporting a city that once shaped minds across continents, quietly, reliably, and without asking to be seen. Tel Caramel. In northern Syria, not far from the bend of the Euphrates, there is a low mound that does not command attention through height or scale, a place that appears modest even by prehistoric standards, and yet quietly forces one of the most profound reconsiderations of when and why humans first began building monumental stone structures. This is Tel Caramel. Unlike later sites defined by agriculture, cities, or kingship, Tel Caramel belongs to a far earlier chapter of human history, reaching back more than 11,000 years, into a time when people were still experimenting with settled life, long before pottery, long before metal, and long before social hierarchies were supposed to demand architecture of permanence. And yet, here, they built stone towers. Not one. Not accidentally, but repeatedly. Excavations at Tel Caramel have revealed a sequence of circular stone towers, each constructed in different phases, one after another over centuries. These towers were not crude piles of rock. They were carefully laid structures with defined walls, consistent curvature, and controlled entrances, built with a discipline that suggests planning rather than improvisation. The earliest of these towers predates the famous tower at Jericho, long considered the world's oldest monumental structure. This alone changes the conversation. Monumentality did not begin suddenly. It was already being explored. The towers at Tel Carmel are not defensive in any conventional sense. Their size and placement do not support military use. They do not command wide views of surrounding territory, nor are they positioned to guard resources or restrict movement. Instead, they occupy central positions within the settlement. This centrality matters. Architecture placed at the center of daily life carries symbolic weight. It becomes reference, orientation, and gathering point. People move around it. They meet near it. They remember it. Stone here was anchoring. Community. The towers were built using carefully selected stones, stacked in circular courses that distribute weight evenly outward rather than downward, a technique that increases stability and allows structures to endure despite the absence of mortar. The builders understood curvature instinctively, using geometry to compensate for limited materials and tools. This is structural intelligence emerging extremely early. What is especially striking is that these towers were rebuilt. When one phase ended, another tower was constructed nearby or directly above earlier remains, respecting the same basic form. This repetition suggests that the towers mattered enough to be renewed rather than abandoned. Meaning persisted across generations. At a time when survival demanded constant attention, these people invested energy into something that did not directly provide food, shelter, or defense. That choice alone tells us something fundamental. The towers were not practical necessities. They were social necessities. Their function remains debated. Some propose ritual use. Others suggest communal storage, signaling structures, or symbolic markers tied to identity or memory. What matters more than the specific interpretation is the shared conclusion that these towers serve the group, not individuals. They were collective architecture. The construction of stone towers requires cooperation, planning, and coordination. Stones must be gathered, transported, and placed with care. Courses must be aligned. Walls must rise evenly. This is not work done casually or alone. It implies organization without hierarchy. No palaces. No elite residences. No evidence of coercive power. Just shared effort focused on a shared structure. Tel Carmel challenges one of the most persistent assumptions in archaeology, that complex architecture emerges only after agriculture produces surplus and hierarchy demands display. Here, architecture appears first, helping create the social cohesion that would later make settled life possible. Stone came before surplus. Structure came before state. Standing on the mound today, it is easy to underestimate the significance of what lies beneath. The towers do not tower anymore. They are reduced to foundations and low walls. But their impact is not diminished by erosion. If anything, it is clarified. These towers represent one of the earliest moments when humans decided that stone could outlast memory. That building something permanent was worth the effort, even when permanence was not guaranteed elsewhere in life. In a series exploring ancient structures that challenge modern expectations, Tel Carmel may be one of the most important chapters, because it does not just question how ancient people built. It questions why they began building at all. The towers suggest that humans did not wait for civilization to begin before shaping stone into meaning. They shaped stone to help civilization begin. Stone became anchor. Anchor became gathering. Gathering became continuity. That sequence matters. Tel Carmel does not offer dramatic silhouettes or massive ruins. It offers something quieter and far more disruptive. Evidence that long before temples, pyramids, or cities, people were already thinking beyond the immediate moment, already investing in forms meant to be returned to, rebuilt, and remembered. These towers were not expressions of power. They were expressions of belonging. And in that sense, they may represent one of the earliest architectural statements humanity ever made. Not about domination of land, but about commitment to place. Stone laid in circles. Circles holding people. People holding time. That is what the stone towers of Tel Carmel truly represent. Not the beginning of architecture, but the beginning of permanence itself. Megalithic fields of Marayur, in the rain-shadow valleys of the Western Ghats, where grasslands open suddenly between dense forests and mist drifts slowly across rolling hills, there is a landscape where stone does not rise into monuments, does not gather into cities, and does not announce authority through height or spectacle. Instead, it waits. This is the megalithic fields of Marayur. Spread across open terrain near the border of Kerala and Tamil Nadu, hundreds of stone structures sit quietly in the grass. Dolmens, cists, stone circles, and slab-covered chambers, arranged not in dense clusters, but in deliberate separation, as if each one was meant to stand alone, remembered individually rather than absorbed into a single monumental statement. From a distance, the stones appear simple. Flat slabs resting on upright supports. Low enclosures barely rising above the earth. Nothing here overwhelms the eye. And yet, when viewed as a whole, the scale becomes unmistakable. This is not accidental placement. It is a designed landscape. The Marayur megaliths date roughly from the Iron Age, though their cultural roots extend further back into prehistoric traditions that valued stone as a medium of memory rather than construction. These were not houses. They were not defensive structures. They were not temples meant for daily ritual. They were markers of presence. Most of the structures functioned as burial monuments, but reducing them to graves alone misses the larger intention. Each dolmen required quarrying, shaping, transporting, and positioning large stone slabs, often weighing several tons, using no mortar and no metal machinery. That effort exceeds what burial alone demands. What mattered here was not concealment of the dead, but visibility of remembrance. The stones were placed on open ground, not hidden in forest or rock shelter. They were meant to be seen, approached repeatedly, recognized across seasons, returned to over generations. The builders understood landscape intimately. The megaliths are positioned on slightly elevated ground, safe from flooding, with clear sightlines across valleys and hills. They do not block movement or enclose space. They coexist with it. Stone here does not dominate land. It marks relationship with it. The construction technique is restrained but precise. Upright slabs are set carefully to support horizontal capstones, distributing weight evenly so that structures remain stable despite soil movement and monsoon cycles. The stones are fitted closely, sometimes with small packing stones inserted to lock them into position. This is practical engineering expressed quietly. No ornamentation distracts from form. No inscriptions explain meaning. The stones rely on repetition rather than decoration, on persistence rather than symbolism. One dolmen alone is modest. Hundreds across a valley become undeniable. This repetition creates rhythm. Walk through the fields, and you begin to sense spacing, intervals, patterns that are not rigidly geometric but intentionally consistent. The landscape feels measured, not wild. Human attention has passed through here many times. The people who built these structures were not centralized under a single ruler or state. There are no palaces nearby, no evidence of urban hierarchy. This makes the scale of construction more striking, not less. Marayur represents collective monumentality. Each family or group may have raised its own stone, but together they created a field of memory that bound communities to land over long periods of time. This is architecture without architects, planning without blueprints, permanence without authority. The megaliths also reflect a worldview deeply connected to cycles. Stone endures while generations pass. Grass grows, dies, and returns. Monsoons come and go. The stones remain. This contrast was not lost on the builders. Stone became the counterweight to impermanence. In a region where organic materials decay quickly and forests reclaim space relentlessly, choosing stone was an act of resistance against forgetting. These monuments do not speak loudly. They simply refuse to disappear. What is especially important about Marayur is how little it tries to explain itself. There are no alignments demanding astronomical interpretation, no carvings announcing myth or identity. Meaning here is quieter, grounded in repetition and presence rather than symbolism. This restraint suggests confidence. The builders did not need to convince future generations of importance. They trusted that the stones themselves would do that work. Standing among the megaliths today, the experience is calm and deeply human. The stones do not intimidate. They invite pause. You move slowly, aware of distance, spacing, and silence. The fields feel used, not abandoned, as if memory still circulates. In a series exploring prehistoric structures that challenge modern expectations, the megalithic fields of Marayur matter because they show that advanced social organization does not require cities, rulers, or spectacle. It can exist in distributed form, spread across land, held together by shared understanding rather than command. Stone here is not power. It is continuity. Each slab placed was a decision to remember. Each structure repeated was a decision to belong. Each field preserved was a decision to stay connected to place. Marayur reminds us that history is not only written in towering monuments or dramatic ruins. Sometimes it is written low to the ground, spread across grass and sky, waiting quietly for someone to notice that nothing here is random. The stones do not tell us who was buried. They tell us that someone mattered enough to be remembered. And when hundreds of stones tell that same story, across the same land, for centuries, the message becomes unmistakable. This landscape was claimed not by force, but by memory, stone by stone, field by field, generation by generation. That is the true legacy of the megalithic fields of Marayur, Qutub Minar. In the southern edge of modern Delhi, surrounded by traffic, expansion, and constant vibration, there stands a tower so tall and so slender that it appears almost improbable. Rising more than 70 meters into the sky, it narrows as it climbs, carrying immense weight upward rather than outward, surviving earthquakes, invasions, restorations, and 8 centuries of environmental stress. This is the Qutub Minar. Much attention has been given to its height, its inscriptions, and its political symbolism. Far less attention is given to the reason it is still standing at all. That reason lies below eye level, beneath the visible stone, where decisions made in the late 12th and early 13th centuries continue to hold the entire structure upright. The foundation of the Qutub Minar is not dramatic. It does not announce itself, but it is one of the most important structural achievements of medieval South Asia. A tower is fundamentally unstable. The taller it grows, the more unforgiving the ground becomes. Any weakness below multiplies above. Delhi sits on alluvial soil, not bedrock. The ground here shifts, absorbs water, dries, cracks, and responds violently to seismic movement. Building a slender masonry tower in this environment requires an understanding of load transfer, settlement behavior, and long-term ground response that goes far beyond stacking stone. The builders of the Qutub Minar understood this. Excavations and structural studies show that the tower rests on a massive circular foundation, far wider than the visible base. This foundation spreads the weight of the minaret across a large area, reducing pressure on the soil and preventing uneven settlement. The visible plinth is only the uppermost expression of a much broader system below. The foundation was dug deep into compacted earth and layered with stone, rubble, and lime-based binding material, creating a dense load-bearing platform capable of absorbing vibration and redistributing stress. This was essential because the tower was never meant to lean on surrounding buildings. It was meant to stand alone. The circular form of the foundation matters as much as its size. Circular bases distribute force evenly in all directions, avoiding stress concentration points that cause cracking or tilt. This is especially critical for tall vertical structures subjected to wind load and seismic motion. Every earthquake tests this decision, and the tower has passed those tests repeatedly. The slight tapering of the minaret above ground works in direct partnership with the foundation below. As the tower rises, its mass decreases, lowering the center of gravity and reducing overturning forces. This is not aesthetic choice alone. It is structural calculation. The stone courses at the base are thicker and heavier, locking the tower into its foundation. Higher levels use lighter materials and narrower profiles. The structure becomes progressively less demanding on the ground as it ascends. This is vertical discipline. Historical records tell us that the tower was damaged by lightning and earthquakes multiple times. Repairs were made. Upper sections were rebuilt. Materials changed. Styles shifted. Yet the foundation was never replaced, never reinforced with modern intervention, and never fundamentally altered, because it did not fail. One of the most revealing details is that the Qutb Minar is not perfectly vertical. It has a slight, measurable inclination. Instead of correcting this aggressively during later restorations, engineers historically chose restraint, understanding that overcorrection could destabilize the foundation. This restraint reflects knowledge. The foundation had settled evenly enough that the lean stabilized rather than accelerated. This indicates that the builders anticipated gradual settlement and allowed for it, rather than attempting rigid perfection. Modern engineers still follow this logic. The surrounding Qutb complex adds further evidence of foundation intelligence. Earlier structures, including reused stone elements from pre-existing buildings, were integrated carefully, but none were allowed to interfere with the tower's load path. Clear space was maintained around the base to prevent pressure transfer from adjacent construction. Isolation was intentional. The minaret's foundation also interacts with water management. Slight elevation and ground shaping guide rainwater away from the base, preventing erosion and saturation beneath the structure. In a monsoon climate, this is critical. Water destroys foundations silently. The builders removed that threat before it could act. What makes the Qutb Minar foundation especially significant in a series about ancient structures that challenge modern expectations is that it demonstrates structural foresight without modern instruments. There were no soil tests in the contemporary sense, no reinforced concrete, no steel cores. There was observation, experience, and inherited knowledge. The builders knew how similar structures failed. They knew how ground behaved across seasons. They knew where weight must go, and they built accordingly. The tower's survival through centuries of political collapse is especially telling. Cities fell, dynasties vanished, maintenance lapsed, earthquakes struck. Yet the tower did not suffer progressive failure, because its most important work was already done. Standing at the base today, the scale of the foundation is easy to underestimate. Visitors look upward. The eye follows the fluting. The inscriptions draw attention away from the ground. But the true achievement is not above you. It is beneath you. The Qutb Minar does not challenge history by suggesting lost technologies or mysterious builders. It challenges history by reminding us that medieval engineers understood principles that modern construction still depends on. Load distribution, settlement tolerance, material, hierarchy, environmental response. These are not modern inventions. They are ancient responsibilities. The foundation of the Qutb Minar was built with the assumption that the tower would outlive its builders, its patrons, and even its purpose. That assumption shaped every decision below ground, and it was correct. The tower remains not because it was protected, but because it was prepared for movement. In a world where tall structures often rely on constant monitoring and reinforcement, the Qutb Minar stands as a reminder that permanence begins before the first visible stone is laid. Not at the top. That is the real legacy of the Qutb Minar's foundation, a lesson in humility and foresight, carved into soil and stone, quietly doing its work while history passed above it. And as the tower continues to rise over Delhi's skyline, unchanged in purpose but unbroken in structure, it confirms something history often resists admitting. Ancient builders were not builders guessing. They knew exactly what they were doing.